My name is Victor Capio, and I'm really happy to be here today to speak about a topic which all of us are quite familiar with or are interacting with in terms of how we are being disrupted. And just to give a brief in terms of what this session is about, as I invite our panelists, I'd just like to say first that CPESA is a non-profit which was established in 2004 and is a think tank based in Uganda, working on different issues around ICT policy, digital rights, data governance, and open data, and basically the ICT policy space. So we support various initiatives around training, research, and also engagements. Every year we host the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa. This year we are hosting it in Windhoek. I don't know how many people have heard, in September. And every year we also publish the State of Internet Freedom in Africa report, which is what I coordinate. So thank you very much. The topic for today is really about air disruption and ICT policy adjustments. I think from the interactions across the conference, we realize that artificial intelligence is presenting a lot of opportunities for both lawyers, judges, governments, and we are all starting to use these digital tools. But what we are seeing is that as they present new opportunities, they're also presenting new risks. They're changing how we make decisions. They're presenting complex questions in our decision-making and in our governance, and also in how we should interpret our laws, because every day there are new questions that they present and new complex questions that we must respond. At the same time, we also have the challenge that we are all jumping into using a lot of these tools without sufficient safeguards. There are various risks that these new technologies are presenting, whether it's through enhancing the spread of disinformation or aiding surveillance through facial recognition systems that can be used to target individuals. There are also those privacy and data governance risks, and we keep on asking whether our laws are capable of addressing or regulating, or is the technology changing faster than we can regulate it. So that legal lacuna that we have in terms of, I think some years back someone said that innovation is the enemy of regulation, and regulation is the enemy of innovation. That when we innovate, the innovators who have just left here will say the law is restricting us and we want more freedom. When you give them more freedom, then we start saying the technology is a problem, we need to regulate it. So it's a constant battle that we'll need to continue checking. And to help us break this down, these issues, I'd like to invite our very able panelists with me. Today we have 3 panelists to help us discuss some of these changes across the continent. I'd like to invite them in no particular order. We have first is Angela Minayo from Article 19 Eastern Africa. And then we have Mothuri Kathure from the Tech Global Institute. And lastly, or should I say last but not least, is Josephine Kaniru from Strathmore CPIT. First, I'd like to ask my panelists to just introduce themselves. 1 minute to just say what you do, what you guys are doing about artificial intelligence. And as you're telling us that, just to give some highlights in terms of how AI and these emerging technologies are disrupting governance and legal frameworks in Africa from experience.
So good afternoon, good people. As you've heard, my name is Muthuri Kathure. I'm a senior policy fellow working on platform governance and internet policy with the Tech Global Institute. Tech Global Institute is a think tank working in the global majority, basically working on platform accountability, trustworthy AI, and internet policy, trying to bridge that gap. There's always that conversation of how far or how models are being built in the global north, but then the implementation in the global south, the questions of bias and discrimination, etc., etc. So our business is just to bridge that gap and have those conversations in the global majority. To respond to the question that Victor has posed in terms of the disruption, and just speaking from a lot of the feedback will just be a build into what I've been listening to from yesterday conversation in terms of the disruption. Once when in governance, I think there are two fronts when it comes to disruption. So there's the internal disruption by public policy institution and governments just realizing that, hey, tech is here and we need to align ourselves to the new phenomenon. But then interestingly, and as many Gen Zs in the room would know, there is the other outside, the public, but also watchdogs and other parties trying to disrupt the governance processes using technology. So internally, we've seen things like the digital public infrastructure conversation in terms of how we transact business, conversations in Kenya and, for example, in Rwanda around how business is transacted in government, payment and things like that. We've also seen things around surveillance in terms of security, also a big conversation in terms of disrupting with surveillance, but then there is two sides of the coin. Research shows that even with the massive investment in terms of surveillance, especially in the African countries, what has risen is mostly some form of closure of civic space, and little of what is intended to do, which is like maybe curb criminal activities and the rest. But then we can't underscore the fact that surveillance is one of the other factor in terms of disruption. But then most importantly is the issue around decision making. I think a number of institutions are thinking about how you use data to make decisions. I think countries like Tanzania, for example, has come up with a number of sector-specific policies and guidelines just to guide how data is used to make decisions in spaces like health, agriculture, etc. Externally, in terms of governance, we've seen tools being used for accountability. Number of instances, I'll use the Kenya Gen Z example. Every time people ask a question, how do we do this? I have a friend who I think conversation with him has become very boring. Every time we start to argue and I want to argue, they'll be like, let's Google, let's check. Why are we arguing? We've seen ourselves falling into that in a good way with the Gen Z protest. So when guys were like, how will we be able to know what is happening with the finance bill? Someone pops up with a chatbot and then people are able to find what is happening. The other day, people were asking about how can we get the data of the people who've been injured during protest. Something comes up. How do we, the case of, she was called Rose Wanjiku, who came up with this amazing tool where you could give feedback to the finance bill of this year and then got arrested and the charges went to be dropped, holding government accountable. So that's another angle in terms of disruption for governance. I will leave it at that so that Angela and the rest can respond to the disruption in the legal space as they introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. You raise very important issues, how even new products are coming, new applications. Angela.
Thank you, Victor. My name is Angela Minayo. I work at Article 19 Eastern Africa as the Digital Rights and Policy Programs Officer. My work on a day-to-day is to advise governments, tech companies, and civil society organizations and other stakeholders on ensuring that human rights are respected as we deploy and innovate new technologies. And of course, AI is one of the new technologies. And just to provoke your thoughts a bit, one would think that with new emerging technologies in the field of information communications, then the world is having more freedom of expression, more spaces to interact and have discourse. But our Article 19 Global Expression Report still indicates a decline in freedom of expression. At least half of the world population is living in a restricted country. Africa, for instance, so many countries are restricted, even the East Africa region itself that used to have a bit more democratic spaces and things like that. So I just want you to think through that question, because whenever I talk about freedom of expression and emerging technologies, I like to present this paradox that how is it that we live in an age with so much advancements in communications, in technology, and yet freedom of expression is threatened. We have more repression than ever before online. We have tech companies that have ganged up with governments to enforce this online repression. So how can we prevent artificial intelligence from following this pattern of repression? That is the question that Article 19 has been trying to figure out. We've done a few policy briefs around red lines on AI, trying to ask technical communities and governments not to have a negative response to AI, but to have a pro-human rights response to human rights. What are some of the ways that AI is challenging governance? For me, really, I'm very interested in how AI is challenging digital markets and competition regulatory mechanisms. For a long time, we've always understood competition law and consumer protection law within the aspect of, the physical goods. The water here is certified by KEBS and whatnot. So trying to think about quality in terms of AI and digital markets, trying to make sure that we don't have dominant players who abuse their role in this AI value chain or supply chain, so to speak. So I think that is another way in which AI is challenging existing or traditional regulatory frameworks. The other challenge I think will be talked about a lot in this panel is around how it's challenging human rights. The fact that it can be an enabler of human rights, and on the other hand, it can be restrictive of rights, especially sensitive rights like the right to privacy when it comes to the data that is being used to train AI models. When you look at freedom of expression and generative AI and such new emerging challenges to freedom of expression. I'll stop at that.
Thank you. You raise very interesting issues. And it poses challenge for regulation, because how do you regulate entities which are not even based in this continent? I'll turn to you, Josephine. Please introduce yourself and also your thoughts on what are the things that are disrupting.
Thank you, Victor, and thank you to Lawyers Hub for having us. So as you've heard, my name is Josephine Kaneru. I'm a legal researcher, and my research work is around tech and the law and where the two meet. So anything to do with cyber law, AI governance, data protection. The work we did, especially around data governance, we were doing a lot of tracking of the laws that are enacted on the continent, and also tracking the implementation. So looking at the data protection authorities and such bodies that have been established on the continent. So I work for CIPIT, and CIPIT is the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology Law. It's a research center at Strathmore University. And I was really glad to be invited for this conversation, Victor. So thank you for having me, because I think when you talk about disruptions, everything to do with technology and the law falls in that bracket. And so when you're talking about issues to do with intellectual property, when you're talking about data governance, when you talk about the right to privacy and other human rights that are in danger due to emerging tech. But if I were just to base my first comment on one area, I'll talk about intellectual property. So the other day I attended an event and there were a few developers there, and they asked me, actually one told me that he works for an institution. He trained at an institution, and him and his friends created a tool, and they were now being given a deal, an ownership deal between them for the university to register the patent. The university established a contract basically, but the university was taking quite a bit of the ownership of the rights to the property. And so he was asking me questions around that. And then he told me, actually, he'd never heard of anything called IP before the meeting that was called by the university. And then the university called a lawyer to come and talk to them, to come and convince them to sign the contract, but they didn't sign the contract. So he came to me to ask, what should he do? Unfortunately, I didn't have a very good answer for him, because what we see in most institutions, they have pre-established ownership models. And I think that has been actually affecting a lot of the inventions we see and innovations we see around technology. The other issue with regard to IP is data. The data being used to train AI models. That has come up in a lot of the case law that we've seen, especially in other jurisdictions. I will just want to point out one of the cases, which is Getty Images versus Stability AI. It's a very interesting case that I've been following up, and I think the process is ongoing in the UK High Court. And what happened in that case is that an AI company scraped data from Getty Images. I think we all know Getty Images. We ran into that label all over the internet. And so Getty Images, said, this is copyrighted materials. We own this data. You're not license, you don't have a license to use it. You're not paying anything for the information. And this went to court. But other than the copyright issues in this case, which I think we will see the decision soon. The other issue that I thought the court would actually provide answers for is responsibility and accountability, which is something we talk about a lot in AI governance. So who is responsible for something created using AI, especially if it's, say, harmful materials, yeah? So Getty said, for example, if someone uses the AI model to create harmful material, us, we don't want to be involved in that. We don't want to be associated with that harmful material. And the court has to actually advise us on that. So just as I end, I will say that the major disruption we are seeing is, and I really loved listening to the earlier panel with the judicial officers, because what we are seeing is judicial officers and the judicial system is having to interpret the laws that we have to just make sense of what's going on, yeah? So that's something I've been very keen about, and I think it's my main takeaway in that we don't have to have an AI Act, we don't have to have an AI law. What's going on can be interpreted by, based on the existing laws, and we can find guidance around that, yeah.
Interesting remarks. Keep holding that mic because we'll come back to you. You've raised issues of intellectual property, and I think one of those questions has been, in the context of copyright, for example, what amounts to fair use when the AI is scraping the website for news articles. And I think we had similar cases for the platforms where Meta, I think, was sued in Australia regarding how their platform was scraping news content and sharing the links. So it's interesting now that we are coming to AI tools and how they're scraping. I don't know whether governments are going to start raising questions, when I think one of those previous presenters was saying that we are analyzing all judicial decisions and scrapping them and can query specific aspects, whether there could be some IP around there. But, it's something that we need to think about, whether in health and other sectors. But specifically, back to you, because you did some research across Africa, looking at different laws and ICT policies around AI issues. And from your research and the work that you guys do at Strathmore, CPIT, what are those gaps and challenges that you've seen based on the work?
Yeah, thank you for that. So in establishing the gaps that are there in policy and in laws, I would say let's start with what's already there, which I think I'm reiterating what I just said. So the first gap for me, before I even get into our research, is we have to realize we have laws that we can use at the moment. So I'll just give an example of, I was talking to some lawyers who are here, and we were talking about the fake case law that people are taking to court in submissions. And I was asking, is this okay? It's not okay, obviously. Who is responsible? In the earlier panel, I gained some empathy in that training is needed for judicial officers. But at the same time, I think people have to be held accountable. So I'll just maybe refer to the code of conduct that governs lawyers in Kenya. You have a responsibility to your client to actually be diligent and to be responsible and to be professional in how you do your job. So if you use an AI tool to draft submissions and then you don't check that whether those cases are real or not, I think there's a responsibility there, and it's something that we can establish. So I will just start with the opportunity to use the laws we currently have to govern artificial intelligence. And I think that just cuts across, because artificial intelligence is just a tool that can apply in health, in agriculture, in judicial services, in every sector. So what we have can actually work to govern AI in that regard. But the other issue in terms of gaps, I think actually AI, emerging tech, and the conversations we're having around this have exposed some gaps in terms of who has conversations, who benefits from conversations, what the gaps are. So there's this image I love. There's an infographic called The Grand Challenges of Human-Centered AI. And I love it because it shows the concerns that arise in AI governance throughout the AI lifecycle. So at the point of collecting data and curating it, what issues arise there? Maybe privacy. How do you minimize bias around that stage? Then as you're going to create the tools, what issues arise around there? As you're going to deploy the tools, what issues arise around there? And I think I was actually wondering, did we have a human-centered lens of looking at other technologies, or did we just start thinking human-centered when it came to artificial intelligence? And I think that's just one way I would think about it. But just in terms of the laws that we were mapping, so currently, just to go with the right to privacy and the enforcement of the right to privacy through data protection laws, currently I think Africa has about 40 countries that have data protection laws. Less than 30 have active data protection authorities, and that tells you something about the implementation and sort of monitoring of how we are adhering to the right to privacy. But the other thing that we've seen is case law. There's been a lot of interpretations that I think are helping us shape jurisprudence around this. In Kenya, there's been quite a lot. I'll just mention the WorldCoin case. I think it was a very important case, not just for Kenya, but just for the whole of Africa. But also there's been other cases that, again, apply to that whole grand challenges of the life cycle, right? So at the point of collecting data and curating it, how are we making sure that we respect human rights? How are we making sure that the workers, the data workers, are taken care of? And then as you go to creating the tools, how do we establish responsibility? Who's responsible? I had someone mention the other day that we actually have to start establishing responsibility for people rather than waiting for an AI law, a binding AI law that then says so and so is responsible for this breach. So an example is they're using AI tools in hospitals for radiology. Yeah. So this guy was saying in a hospital, the radiologist is the one who signs off. He's the one who, he or she is the one who looks at the results, they interpret, they make sure their opinion is a big part of the decision making, and then they sign off. So if something goes wrong, the radiologist is responsible, yeah? So we can't now say, oh, we don't know who's responsible. Sure, the designer, sure, we can, as we go, we can establish jurisprudence about how the designer, whoever bought and sold the tool, we can establish all that. But at this moment, the person has a responsibility. And I think this is why I was also mentioning the lawyers and the fake case law. You have a responsibility, and we can start from there as we go forward. But the other gap in terms of laws, so in Africa, we really don't have any AI law. I don't think so. We have policies and strategies, and I think those are great roadmaps. And we have I've had 12, I've also had 16, so we have 12 to 16 policies or strategies of some form on the continent. And I think these are really, really important because they, even at the basic level, they just say these are the principles we want to pay attention to when developing tools. Make sure it's human-centered AI, make sure you pay attention to privacy, make sure you minimize bias, make sure there's data minimization when collecting data to use, just such things. So I think that's really important, but there's still room just to create more. There's also room to harmonize. So last year, the African Union released the AU AI strategy, the Continental AI Strategy. And I think it serves as a good baseline that all African countries, again, can borrow from, just as I'm mentioning, the principles, even if it's just the principles. And my main takeaway from the strategy, the AU strategy, was that we want African-centered and development-focused AI deployment and AI creation. So even if it's just taking that, we want to do development, we want to make sure we solve the problems that exist, and then we want to make sure it's based on a human rights framework, that we pay attention to human rights. Even that alone is good guidance for the countries now to take that up. But at the country level, if I were just to come back to, say, Kenya, so we have the National AI Strategy, which was launched this year. It's a great roadmap. It says what our priorities are in terms of where we want to, deploy AI and develop AI. It says we want to make sure that we pay attention to human rights, again, issues around inclusion, that all people are included. But I will keep saying that I don't think we have to wait for a binding AI Act to say that we are regulating AI. I think a lot of the laws that we have actually govern concerns around AI. So if I could end there, yeah.
Thank you very much. Just a round of applause. Very, very interesting. I mean, it shows actually that, while there's some gaps, there's actually some progress that's being made. I think maybe 2 years back, last year, I think the number of countries with data protection laws was in the low 30s, and the year before that was also in the low 20s. So I think in the past 3 years, we've had more than 20 countries coming up with data protection laws, which is good progress. And also in the past 1 year, I think most of these AI strategies have also been developed in the past 1 year. So that's also progress in the face of, changing technology. So actually, across different countries, we are making progress. And I just want to point out, as I move to Angela, because you mentioned human rights, and, we have all these challenges, whether it's surveillance, whether it's discrimination, whether it's disinformation. We all have constitutions and beautiful regional instruments saying that human rights should be protected and respected and promoted. But these technologies present new challenges every day. And as much as I know, Josephine says our laws are sufficient. Are they sufficient? And what do we need to do to make sure that actually these innovations respect human rights, freedom of expression, privacy, and so on?
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Josephine. Just to pick up from what Josephine has shared, I don't think the laws are sufficient, unfortunately. And I'm going to explain why by my first point on the fact that we need to strengthen corporate human rights regimes in the continent. AI forces us to look at tech companies more closely. And it also forces governments to guide businesses on how to respect human rights. It is not enough to tell Microsoft, OpenAI, and God knows which other AI company to respect human rights. That is not enough. International human rights framework demands that national states guide businesses on how to respect human rights. And I think the battle now is on clarifying these human rights obligations. Is it human rights impact assessment? Is it a risk mitigation framework? Is it quarterly reports on how you are respecting human rights? Does it mean we need to attach human rights compliance to existing compliance regulatory mechanisms for issuance of licenses and whatnot? Does it mean that we need to reframe who is a dominant market player and what are the rules they should be playing by to make sure that consumers are protected? So laws in the continent currently are a bit loose on the things that matter. And that means that Africa still is exposed to platforms that have a double-sided approach. So they're very human rights compliant in Europe and in other markets. And then in the African markets, because we are yet to clarify these obligations to them, they are able to give us substandard products. So we need to work on the corporate human rights aspect. Very much tied to it is on standards. Standard setting and protocols is a very big tool that is not yet used to almost guide, again, AI deployers and innovators. I say this because we have people who are deploying AI, but not necessarily are in charge of the training of the models and things like that. So we have two players, and we need to work on standards. These standards could come from the national standards, like what the Kenya Bureau of Standards has done by issuing an AI code of conduct for developers. These standards could come from your competition authorities or the consumer protection regulators. But we need standard setting to pick up pace in the continent as much as it is picking up pace in the global standard setting agenda. Also, we need to look at human rights mechanisms as avenues for getting guidance on how to deal with AI-related human rights challenges. I've seen this being done by various human rights mandate holders, especially on freedom of expression at the UN level, at the African Commission. Not so much guidance has come from the East Africa community or COMESA, but these are also places we need to ask them to clarify the role of players in terms of respecting human rights and AI. Finally, it's civil society. And I'm going to use a very interesting example I saw that I think we need to emulate. One day we opened our phones and noticed that WhatsApp had integrated Meta AI. There was no consultation with users. There was no opt-in, opt-out. The moment you click on it, it's like you've agreed and you have AI installed on your WhatsApp. And then there's this civil society organization, I've forgotten the name, but they did a letter to Meta asking them to, justify their decision to integrate AI without any user input. And I think that's the way to go, that civil society and other actors need to be more vigilant around trends and patterns we see in the market to keep businesses in check. Thank you.
Thank you. Just staying with that thought a bit, we've seen local innovators. I know you spoke of big tech, but we also have our local tech. What would you say to them in terms of compliance with human rights obligations? Because sometimes we frame it for the Microsofts and so on, but we have our guys here who are picking the same contracts and putting them and say accept all terms for you to install and use. So what is it that local innovators need to do across the region? Because they're also borrowing these same business models and practices. And in the absence of regulation, are we going to see a repetition?
It's interesting you raised that, because I think that the reason why we are not able to guide the Microsofts and whatnot is because we're not even guiding local players. The thing we need to have is a blueprint or a template of what it is we demand from businesses in the business of tech, right? And then vary the terms and the compliance depending on the actors. This is what will apply to foreign companies. This is what is going to apply to local companies. But at the moment, our human rights frameworks still underestimate business and human rights. And this deprioritization means that we're not able to guide the big players. So it starts at the small level that is not happening. And that's why when Meta or Google asks us what do we want, we can't point them to our laws because we haven't fixed the local requirements and regulation in the first place. So it is a symptom of the problem. More, if you ask me, it's a symptom of the problem. And I also understand that by always talking about big tech, we are also underestimating and not valuing African tech players, which in itself is also another problem.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, finally, Muthuri, we have, all these governments, whether it's judiciaries, AI is the latest big new thing that everybody must put in their system. Case filing powered by AI. Judicial decisions powered by AI. Everything must have AI. If it is not AI, is not development. But at the same time, we want to deliver effective public services to people, deliver access to justice, ensure transparency. So how can governments strengthen public service delivery, even if it's powered by the AI, but what can they do? Keep it very brief because of time. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought we have all the time to ask, because I thought you'd ask me what I think about the laws that we have, because Josephine said I can add. Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting panel where people can disagree. Some think that we have enough laws, some don't think we have. But I will take like a middle position to that and say, like, my experience in the tech and society space is, I like the idea of innovation, of judicial officers innovating with the laws that we have. I hear Angela in terms of we might not have enough laws and policies, especially around AI. But my worry in this region and continent generally is whenever we start thinking of laws, we give an opportunity to close spaces to do those things. And it happened to when we're working on online freedoms, we realized in Kenya we have several laws talking about same thing, and the big thing was hate speech. Hate speech is mentioned in penal code, all the laws that you can, I think 6 or so. And so my worry is when we start talking about that, we open a door for closing. But I agree. And we saw last year when we had a proposal to have a robotics and AI bill, which was a very bad law. So we need to think about innovation on one side and regulation on the other side, not to allow that loophole. But then going to your question, and I don't think powered by AI is the only buzz thing around that conversation about service delivery. African countries with the investment, but also picking interesting terminology. In Kenya, we're talking about technopolis. We have smart cities to it. A government like Uganda, Irambo, whatever. We have e-citizen in Kenya, and a lot of investment going to it. Just quickly to answer a question, I think one of the things that is missing and which was discussed in the morning is the underlying factor and the foundation of how all this is done in terms of service delivery. Service delivery, as it should be, should serve everyone, involve everyone. But you look at most of these processes in terms of how you're doing the smart cities, who are involved in the conversation, what is the intention, true intention of having all this surveillance in the cities? Is it really to curb insecurity, or is it to start looking at who is protesting, which human rights defender is out there, and things like that? Concepts that means to us as African must be the underlying factor when we are thinking as judicial officers or as governments in developing or deploying these things. But quickly, what are the things that I think can do? I think very much discussed, and what you've discussed, isn't how things can be done with the justice system. We've seen a number of innovation being talked about here. If honestly we want to use this innovation for service delivery, then it should be very quick to help us with things like agriculture, talking about when the rainfall will things like that. Diagnosis when it comes to the healthcare and the rest. And then I think importantly is to think of how does it help the community at that level. Most of these innovation policies and laws are usually discussed by a few of us, not forget about just lawyers, just a few lawyers who've pivoted towards tech and law. Majority of them will tell you, we don't even know we have AI strategy in Kenya. We don't know in Zambia we have an AI policy. We have an AI AU continental whatever thing. So if it's that, if it looks like that when it comes to the practitioners, imagine what it looks like for the people on the ground. So just like any other innovation, any other public service delivery, any other thing that is meant for good, everyone should be involved and make it easy for them to understand what it means to them, so that you can have like an adoption and being used by the population.
All right, thank you. A round of applause for him. Yeah, thank you. You mentioned that, is important, and I think I'll just add multi-stakeholder participation and design thinking, that let's think of everybody with the end in mind, and that process must be inclusive. I think that would be a good way to wrap up. Perhaps if there's any.
Okay, there's a microphone over there. Let's start there, and then we'll come over here.
So those two, right?
Yeah.
Okay, please just introduce yourself and say who you're directing the question to.
Well, I'm called Haddad Salim from Uganda. Mine is not basically a question, but a disruption. I think the first disruption is us jumping the queue. Our people say from Uganda that if you're driving your father's car, you cannot have a say in association of bicycle owners. As Africans, we are busy talking about regulating technology that, IA this, IA that. Where is Africa's space in IA? Where is the African developer? Where is the Africa's technology that we can now come and sit and pride ourselves in regulating? So I would think that as Africa, we should start focusing on establishing the African AI space. Sovereignty, I'm talking about the sovereignty of Africa as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. If we could do that, I think we would go somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. There was another, fully agree with your sentiments. I think there's another hand here.
Hello, my name is Victor Sirenga, an advocate practicing in Kenya. My question goes to Angie. The question is, with the Kenyan elections coming on the horizon, what specific interventions are you guys doing to implement the issue of disinformation?
All right, thank you. Okay, we'll take that one that's there, and then we'll come that's this side. Okay, here we have those two.
Okay, thank you. My name is Toby, a Nigerian lawyer. My question really goes to the entire panel. I'm also studying an MBA in ESA in Barcelona, so I'm tempted to always think about revenue and cost when we talk about AI tools and integrating them into the legal industry. So far, in terms of your research, to what extent do you think we'll be able to have tools that are very affordable to all stakeholders, including the users, especially the common African person? And to what extent do you also think this disruption can help accelerate business growth in the legal industry?
All right, thank you. Let's come to this side for these two.
Thank you. My question goes to any of the panelists.
Your name, please?
My name is Joanita Nagama. And my question relates to what has been termed as digital colonialism. So in light of the exploitation of labor, the AI infrastructure, and the extraction of rare earth minerals, how do we protect the African continent from digital colonialism? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Last but not least, lady in red.
My name is Nagadia Hamida from Uganda. My question is in respect to education. With artificial intelligence that now we have and the types or nature of education systems that we have in East Africa, do you think there's any disruption? Do you think it is effective? Does it rhyme with artificial intelligence being in play and other technological advancements that are going on, do you think the education system now that is apparently within the East African region rhyme with artificial intelligence and other technological developments? If not, I would suggest, before we proceed maybe with answering the question, that we need to revamp the education system within East Africa so that it rhymes with the technological advancements that are there. Because when you look at specifically in Uganda, we operate at university level, especially in the legal education, we operate on a non-competence-based curriculum. And when you look at what is now evolving, is that there is artificial intelligence and other kinds of technological advancements that are happening. So we, those who are in academia, how are we harmonizing this? How are we dealing with this? Is there a need at the East African community level to revamp the kind of education systems that we use so that the system is effective and the quality of products of graduates that we get are actually what we expect? Because I've been hearing all along that we are focusing on the output, but not the process.
All right, thank you. I think last question here at the front.
I promise it's not a question.
Okay.
It's just a comment. The first comment is, it's always interesting when it comes to law, whether we need law or whether we don't need law. And as a legislative draftsperson, I'm always number one to say, have we done the regulatory impact assessment first to see what we need actually in the law? Because one thing we also do a lot of is not checking in the laws. As she said, there are areas in the law that we can use. But the issue is, have they been taken out and highlighted for people to understand which ones they can use for which areas and how far they can take them? The second way, if we know that law takes time to come through, which answers your question, the next question is, how best do you get enforcement? Because that's the biggest problems we have in Africa, is the enforcement of the laws that we currently have. Even in business and human rights, you look at mining, there's so many compliance issues that come through, but they're not complied with, yet the law is there. You have all these particular laws that say you can't pollute, you can't do this, you can't do that. But where's the Environmental Protection Agency? What are they doing? Who's litigating? Because that's the next question. Are people litigating on the laws that are there to say whether they're sufficient or not efficient? So those are the things I think when we're talking about disruption and adjustments and innovation, those are the things we need to look at. Because I think everybody looks at strategic litigation as only being for certain areas, but these are areas for strategic impact litigation as well, because they have fundamental issues on a lot of people in our societies. So those are the issues that, as lawyers in this room, as techies in this room, as regulators in this room, to ask.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for everybody who has asked a question or given a comment.
Maybe I can have a comment. Okay. My name is Zawadi Evelyn. I'm a techie in Kenya. So I'll just like to slightly chime in the conversation around what is the place of Africa in these AI disruptions and adjustments. And being a data person, we have a choice of one, inventing the wheel, but we know what all that comes with. Capital and all the capacity, we may not be able to have that as a continent. But then all this AI conversation is backed and founded on data and data systems. And Africa is one of the continents that produces lots and lots of data because we have diversity, different languages, different people, different culture. So maybe we can start thinking around how we can make the resource that you have data, which is very key in AI, causing adjustments and disruptions so that we can have or partake in the cake. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Fantastic. It's good to have the techies in the room. I'll just turn to the panel. I don't know who wants to go first. You've had the questions. Angela, you can start. I think there were some that were directed at you.
Yes. I'll take 2 questions or maybe 3, depending. But I'll start with the one on disinformation. So Article 19's position when it comes to disinformation is that we need to deal with the root cause. And the root cause you'll find is that first there's a social media business model that actually favors or incentivizes more disinformation, because if you're going to be paid based on how many people come to your page or how many people view your post, of course you'll post something, salacious, something scandalous to get the views. So we have always called for relooking at the business models of the social media platforms themselves. The second thing, again, alongside the root cause issue, is that we don't have independent or diverse enough media. So whenever media freedom is threatened, you end up having a lot more disinformation, a lot more speculation, because people don't have credible news sources or credible places to get information, to verify information and things like that. So another way we are trying to respond to disinformation is to work on strengthening media freedom and plurality. Lastly is continuous engagement with platforms. We are always talking to the platforms, especially around elections, to share with them the keywords, to share with them the patterns we are seeing, and just to bounce off ideas on how well they can be prepared for elections, because we now know that during elections period, there is the IEBC and then there's the social media platforms who have to be ready for the elections. I hope I've answered your question. I'm going to make a comment on the business and human rights issue, correct. And the reason I even kept saying strengthening is because it is a weak framework. It is a weak framework because if it was a strong enough framework, we'll see businesses even attempting to comply in the existing traditional human rights. They're not doing that. It gets even harder for tech, because already digital rights are seen as this, it's online, it's not, yes, exactly. So if we are struggling in the tangible rights, you can imagine how much more we will struggle in the intangible rights. And therefore, we are calling for strengthening. But you'll be surprised that there are countries that don't even have any business and human rights frameworks or national action plans. And so with them, even the idea of just conceptualizing businesses as right holders or as people with human rights obligations is the uphill task. So you can just look at it, the fact that African countries are at different levels when it comes to corporate human rights frameworks, strengthening the ones that are in existence and introducing in countries where there are none at all, and still understanding that nuance of when it's intangible, it's harder to enforce. I think I'll end it at that.
So I can take another question, the one from Hamida, about education and the level of education. But before that, I would want to clarify that I didn't say we have enough laws. I think I just think we should start with what we have. But I certainly get actually Angela's concerns about business and human rights, and it's something you talk about a lot, and also on that journey of actually discovering what do we do. So I'll join you on that journey. But I do also like the recognition that it's about enforcement and it's about the strength of the frameworks. And then I think the Honorable Justice just clarified something that I would have wanted to say. Thank you for saying it like that. We are doing some sort of impact assessments so that we see where to strengthen the laws and we see what to fix, so that we don't just do an AI act, because I think that's the temptation is just to create more laws and more laws. So let's just see where the gaps are and then fix that. To Hamida's question about education, our education level, I think this conversation would have actually gone there in terms of the gaps in skills and capacity that we have on the continent. But because of time, maybe we didn't get there. But I certainly agree with you. I think that a lot of countries, a lot of the AI strategies we are seeing on the continent and even the continental framework, it recognizes that gap in skills and capacity. And for example, the Kenyan AI strategy, I know that intends to have a system where ICT and AI education actually starts from the most basic level. And I think that would be a great thing. And I'll keep pointing out what I said earlier. I keep wondering, with other technologies, did we not think about human rights? Did we not think about human-centered technology? Because if we did, then we would have started actually doing ICT education from a very basic level, even when I was in primary school, which is many, many years back. But my point is, maybe this is the time that we're exposing these gaps, but if it's okay even if they were there before. If this is the time we're exposing them, then we address them now. So that's one of the gaps I agree with, skills and capacity, and not just skills in terms of developers to make tech for us, but just the children. How do we educate them in terms of technology? Also because they are the growing users of these technologies. We have a lot of concerns about how children are using technology, and I think that also just falls into your question, which is how do we just educate all of us to adapt to technology? Sorry.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Mudhuri. in brief.
So I'll take the two remaining questions on digital neocolonization. Very interesting debate. I really love reading Abeba Birhan and Najira Sambuli stuff around that. They really write a lot about the whole conversation. But I hear you and I understand where we're coming from in terms of the extractiveness. One of the things that I learned the other day, we call them, they are called data centers. I realize in Africa we're calling them data mining centers, and that makes a lot of sense because it's our data that is being mined to build AI models and things like that. But then I am an optimist, and I want to look for at it from the other side. What are we doing to fight this, a new form of colonialism? And I think it's very important for us to start thinking of investment into our own innovation, looking at incentives. We're seeing what is happening, for example, in China and the rest. Are we, how are our laws and regulation around the same? But we've also seen some winning around in that fight against the new colonialization. We've seen the government, the courts in Kenya pushing back on big tech operation in the country, like telling them, look, this is not a jungle. You can't operate the way you want. There are laws and regulations that you want to adhere to. So there is some hope to it, but I see where you're coming from. But also internally as Africa, we have to think about, if you're talking about a region, the debates around data sovereignty and cross-data border transfer of data. That will help in terms of innovation and the rest of the things. But if you look at most of our data protection laws, of course, copy-pasted from GDPR, are so big on data sovereignty that your data cannot move from this country to the other. So if someone who is innovating in Zambia, might be difficult for them to get that. Also clauses on trade and things like that. So I think that's how I look at it. The other question was, how soon will we have affordable AI tools that can be used in the legal profession? I haven't done any research around that, but my answer is, I won't say how soon will we have affordable, but how soon will we have models that speak, look like us, that don't have an accent and things like that. I don't know how soon we'll have a chatbot that will call my name Muthuri properly without having an American accent. That's my biggest push at this point. Bias and discrimination is a big question in terms of the models that are building beyond even affordability. Thank you very much.
Wow, another round of applause. Wow. There's a presenter in Kenya who says, let's call the fire brigade. This panel has been smoking. So thank you, everybody. Just before we close, I just want to read some comments from the online participants. I think Musi Florida saying that multi-layered liability framework when it comes to assigning liability to AI may be one of the best approaches because it encourages proactive responsibility by all stakeholders rather than scapegoating a single party. Winnie Kungu says that I think REX, regional economic communities like ESC, SADC, etc., should spearhead a continental framework that will guide countries in the development of their national AI strategies. And that as a principle, national laws are jurisdictional, which defies the fact that technology surpasses geographical boundaries. How do we ensure accountability for acts or omissions by actors outside the jurisdiction of the national law? So that's a constant question that's transboundary in nature and also the conflict of laws. And Musi also says that for Africa, I believe the AU has developed the AU strategy. I think that was also mentioned. And that the biggest issue is implementation and adaptability to the ever-changing phases of technology. I think that is also around issues of enforcement and implementation. We have fantastic laws, but we don't have good implementation, so something that we need to think about, and that there's need to build consensus, which is very important, Winnie. George Lambo also agrees that one area which is where little is being done is the area of business and human rights. I think that has already been mentioned, and also it's important to take account the dynamic nature of technology and let technology accommodate the law instead of the other way. I think that's a debatable issue. Is it easier to develop technology to comply with the law or to change the law to adapt to the technology? Which is easier? So I think those are questions that we'll definitely need to think think about. So thank you very much, everybody. Let's give the online participants a round of applause. Please also clap for yourselves. And for the panel, was it not a master class? Say master class. Master? Master? Thank you.
Full and responsa. Yeah.